Hi, this is lesson 5 of the B2 course, and this is our first review lesson. So in this lesson, we're going to look back at key areas studied in lessons 1, 2, 3 and 4. So remember, lessons 1 and 3 were grammar based and lessons 2 and 4 were vocabulary. So why is review important? Well, when you're learning a language, you take on board a lot of new structures, a lot of new words, and unless you have the opportunity to practice these, to consolidate them, it's very easy to forget, and then they don't become part of your active language. So the review element is really, really important. So this is review lesson 1, and we're going to focus on question forms 1 and 2, which were lessons 1 and 3, and vocabulary connected to illness and healthcare. So if you feel unsure about any of these, it's a good opportunity to go back and have a look at the lesson before you watch this one. So in this lesson, you will review questions to ask when you meet someone for the first time, review asking questions politely, review collocations on the topic of illness, review commonly confused words, review phrasal verbs connected to healthcare, and discuss what you can do to be healthy using the vocabulary from the lesson. So there's lots in this lesson, lots to think about and lots to review. Okay, so we're going to start with question forms. And we're going to think about meeting someone for the first time. Now, the first part of this, I want you to think, what questions could you ask socially? So here we have a group of people in a social situation. It's an informal situation. They're all they're friends, or perhaps they're meeting in a social situation for the first time. What sort of questions could you ask if you joined this group in a social context? So remember in lesson 1, you thought about what questions you would ask me. Well, that was slightly different because it wasn't in a social context. So your language can be a little less formal. So what questions could you ask socially? If you've got some ideas, note them down on a vocabulary pad or make record of it on your phone. It's a good idea to try to store your ideas, store the sentences, store the vocabulary. Okay, so meeting somebody for the first time socially, you're going to want to find out a bit more about them. That's the polite thing to do. So you're going to ask questions: where do you come from? Where do you live? Have you lived here long? What do you like to do in your free time? So you're going to be focusing on them and their personality, their interests and their hobbies. So this is different to when you meet someone for the first time in a business context. What questions could you ask somebody if you meet in a business context? So here you need to think a bit more about being more formal and think about the topic that you're going to ask them. Not so common, not so polite to ask about their outside interests at the beginning. You want to focus more on their work, their company, perhaps the area in which they're based. So what do you do? Have you worked for the company long? Do you enjoy your job? How did you get into marketing? So focusing more on the work aspect. Okay, so let's do some practice. So let's think about two people meeting and what questions they could ask. Now what I've done is I'm going to give you the answers. So there are 5 answers. Think about what I've just said. There are 5 answers, but what do you think the questions could be? So we'll have a look at the answers. Again, note down, what do you think the questions are if these are the answers? Number 1, in Manchester. Number 2, for 15 years. Number 3, I'm a journalist. Number 4, the New York Times. And number 5, I really enjoy it. So if these are the answers, what are the questions? So good opportunity to pause the video and think and make notes. These are the answers. What are the questions? Okay, so I'm going to give you some possibilities here. Some possible questions. Number 1, where do you live? You could also have, where were you born? That would also be possible here. How long have you lived there? Number 3, what do you do? Number 4, which paper do you work for? And number 5, do you like your job? So these are just some possibilities. There are other options too, but these were just some possibilities. If those were the answers, these are possible questions. Good, so I hope you got some of those right. Okay, the second thing that we looked at in the lesson on question forms was being polite. And in English, it's very important to have that level of politeness, especially when you don't know the other person. Let's have a look then and see if we can review what strategies we looked at to make English more polite. So, can you rewrite these sentences using strategies from grammar lesson 2, that was question forms 2, to make them more polite? So, number 1, close the door. Number 2, can I sit here? Number 3, help me. Number 4, what? And number 5, I don't understand. So these are all perfectly correct sentences, and if you said them to somebody, they would understand, but we're thinking about being polite. We're thinking about using English in the correct form depending on the situation. So it's not very polite to just say, what? If you don't understand or if you don't hear what somebody says. So think back to lesson 3, which was question forms 2. What strategies did we practice to make English more polite? There are different options. Can you remember any of them and can you put them into these sentences? Okay, so a good opportunity to pause the video and take note of your answer. And these are just some options. Number 1, would you mind closing the door, please? Number 2, do you mind if I sit here? Number 3, could you help me, please? Number 4, I'm sorry, I didn't catch what you said. And number 5, I'm afraid I don't understand. So the important thing to note here, remember, in number 1, after the expression would you mind, you need to use the ing form of the verb. Would you mind closing the door? Would you mind opening the window? Would you mind speaking slowly? So when you use would you mind, you need to use an ing form of the verb. And then other techniques, we looked at using I'm sorry and I'm afraid at the beginning of the sentence, which softens it. And we talked about, instead of using can, using could. It just raises that level of politeness. So instead of using can, use could, use I'm afraid, I'm sorry, and of course put please on the end. That makes it nice and polite. Good. How are we doing? Hopefully well. Hopefully you've remembered a lot of what we've talked about. Okay, so lesson 2 was looking at illness. So we looked at different types of illness, and I asked you, are you ill often? Do you go to see the doctor, or do you prefer to try to make yourself feel better? Now, in this topic, there were some words that were commonly confused. So some vocabulary that have quite a similar meaning, but are different. Can you remember what the difference is? So what's the difference between disease and illness, bandage and plaster, injured and damaged, fever and rash, I am sick and I've been sick? Do you remember? So they're quite similar often, which is why we confuse them, why people make mistakes, because they're used often in quite a similar way, but they are different. What's the difference? Pause the video and make some notes. So disease and illness. So disease would be something where we're thinking about something like cancer, for example, is a disease, whereas illness is more general. So if you have a cold, if you're not feeling well, you feel ill. Bandage and plaster. Okay, so a plaster is much smaller. If I cut my finger, I'm going to put a plaster on it. A bandage is white, well, usually white, fabric, like a gauze. And if you do something serious to yourself, then you would have a bandage. Also used to support. Maybe if you sprain your arm, you might have a bandage to support your arm. Injured and damaged. Do you remember? This was quite a clear distinction because injured is talking about the human body and damaged is talking about an object. So for example, if there is a car accident, the people inside are injured, but the car is damaged. So that's quite an interesting way quite a useful way to remember. Car accident, the people inside are injured, but the car is damaged. So it depends what you're talking about as to which word you need to use. Fever and rash. Well, a fever is when you have a very high temperature, very hot, very high temperature. That's a fever. A rash is a red mark on your skin, usually if you are allergic to something. So maybe you have an allergy to pollen and you go and touch a flower. You have an allergic reaction, which might be a rash on your skin. And number 5, I am sick and I've been sick. Now, be careful here because it's not connected to the tense, even though the tense is different. I am sick means I feel ill, I feel unwell, in general. I've been sick is referring to the physical act of vomiting. So quite different. So if, for example, you wake up and you have a headache, you have a sore throat, you say, I am sick, I can't go to work today. If you eat something and it disagrees with you and you vomit, you would say, I've been sick. Okay, so let's practice. I've got 5 sentences and I've left out a word. Do you know what's the missing word? Number 1, ow, I've cut my finger. I need a. Number 2, I think I'm allergic to that plant. I touched it and now I have a. Number 3, 17 people were in the accident. Number 4, scientists are working on a cure for the. And number 5, I'm sorry, I can't come to work today. So I gave you some big clues when I was talking before, when I was explaining what the words mean. So pause the video and note down your 5 answers. Number 1. Ow! I've cut my finger. I need a plaster. Number 2. I think I'm allergic to that plant. I touched it and now I have a rash. Number 3. 17 people were injured in the accident. Number 4. Scientists are working on a cure for the disease. Number 5. I'm sorry, I can't come to work today. I'm sick. How many of those did you get right? So remember, when you're learning new words, when you're learning vocabulary, it's really important to try to use them in context. Looking at word lists in isolation is not really very useful because you need to be able to use the word and understand the difference, especially when there are some words that have very similar meanings. So a good thing to do when you have a new word, always try to put it in a sentence, or use a dictionary where it gives you an example sentence of the word being used in context. Okay. Also in our illness lesson we had lots of collocations. Remember, collocation means verb and a noun that often go together. Learning collocations is a really useful way to improve your level because it makes your English more fluent. Let's have a look at 7 examples. Last week an injection. The doctor advised him to the medicine twice a day. Good morning. I'd like to an appointment, please. I in a lot of pain. Can you help me? He an operation to remove his appendix. She from an illness, which means she's often out of breath. And number 7, she an allergic reaction if she goes near nuts. Do you remember, do you know what the missing verbs are? So have a look, pause the video and make a note of your answers. Last week I had an injection. Number 2, the doctor advised him to take the medicine twice a day. Number 3, good morning, I'd like to make an appointment, please. Number 4, I am in a lot of pain. Can you help me? Number 5, he had an operation to remove his appendix. Number 6, she suffers from an illness, which means she is often out of breath. Number 7, she has an allergic reaction if she goes near nuts. How did you do? Remember, if you find this difficult, if you're not sure and you want to practice some more, go back and have a look at the original lesson. So that's the vocabulary from lesson 2, which was on illness. So if you think, oh, I'm not sure about that, or I don't quite understand, go back and have a look at lesson 2. Okay, healthcare. Lesson 4 of the course was on the topic of healthcare. In this lesson, we talked about different types of doctors. So I know the word doctor, we all use the word doctor and we know this word, but at this level we need to be thinking about being more precise with our English. And there are lots of different types of medical professional depending on what's the matter with you. And we talked about some of these in lesson 4. So I'm going to show you some anagrams. Anagrams are words where the letters have been moved. So the letters are all there, but they're in the wrong order. And I'm asking you, what's the word? So, do you know what these words are. Remember, you need to move the letters around, and I've given you a hint. We talked about these words in lesson 4. I think the last one, do you remember we had a very, very long word? Pause the video and make a note of your answer. So we had surgeon, specialist, dentist, midwife, and ophthalmologist. Can you remember what do they do? So well done if you got all of those correct. That was a bit tricky. But can you remember what do they do? We talked about the difference in their job roles. What do they do? So we have a surgeon who performs operations, a specialist. If your GP doesn't know the answer to the problem, he will refer you to a specialist. The dentist to take care of your teeth, a midwife if you are having a baby, and the last one, the ophthalmologist, will help you if you have a problem with your eyes. So it's not the person you go to see to have glasses, that's an optician. But if you have something medically wrong with your eyes and you go to a hospital, the eye doctor is an ophthalmologist. Well done if you remembered all of those. Great. Okay, so the last part of the lesson, the last part of our review, we're going to talk about being healthy. Are you a healthy person? Do you try to be? Okay, what can we do to be healthy? Number 1, cut on fast food. Number 2, cut alcohol. Number 3, give smoking. Number 4, take exercise. And number 5, work at the gym. Pause the video and write down your answers. Okay, let's check. Cut down on fast food. Number 2, cut out alcohol. Number 3, give up smoking. Number 4, take up exercise. And number 5, work out at the gym. Remember the difference between number 1 and 2. Cut down means reduce. Cut out means eliminate. So 5 options here. What do you do? Do you do any of these? So remember, learning new vocabulary, try to put it in a sentence. So try to make some sentences about yourself using these phrasal verbs. For example, I've cut down on fast food recently. And I have taken up exercise. I never work out at the gym, but I do like to go running. So try to put the words in sentences that are relevant and useful for you, and then you'll find that it's much easier to use these words. Okay, in lesson 4, we also had some health collocations. So I've given you the verbs at the top. We have be, make, call in, feel, and pull. Can you put them in the right place? Number 1, I'm sorry to hear you were in hospital. I hope you a speedy recovery. Number 2, Mr. Barnes won't be at work. He has sick. Number 3, if you move too quickly when playing sport, you might a muscle. Number 4, I poorly, so I'm going to stay at home today. Number 5, if someone is ill, we can say that they are the weather. Pause the video and note down your answers. Number 1. I'm sorry to hear you are in hospital. I hope you make a speedy recovery. Number 2. Mr. Barnes won't be at work. He has called in sick. 3. If you move too quickly when playing sport, you might pull a muscle. Number 4. I feel poorly, so I'm going to stay at home today. And 5. If someone is ill, we can say that they are under the weather. How did you do? Did you get those correct? Remember, this is a review lesson. That's why we're doing lots and lots of practice. If you come across something and you think, I'm not sure about that, go back to the previous lesson and have a look at the lesson and review it. And then you can try this again. Okay, so the final part, we had some collocations in the topic of health. Can you remember the correct verb? Number 1, to a cold. Number 2, to wait. Number 3, to smoking. Number 4, to a patient. And number 5, to medicine. Pause the video, write down your answers. Okay, number 1, to catch a cold. 2, to put on weight. 3, to give up smoking. 4, to treat a patient. And 5, to prescribe medicine. Really well done if you got 5 out of 5. If you didn't, no problem, but it's a good opportunity to go back and check. So thank you very much for joining me in lesson 5. Lesson 6 is going to be a grammar lesson, and we will be looking at the present perfect tense. Have you studied that before? Join lesson 6 and find out more about it. Thank you and see you then. Bye.